He watched, stiff and skeptical, as the tiny blind boy placed a hand in the waitress's palm, and in that fragile moment, a billionaire father felt the weight of a lifetime crack deep in his chest. Will a single dance be enough to teach him how to see truly? If you're enjoying this story, like and subscribe for more heartwarming stories like this. The sound of a jazz piano floated faintly through the lobby of the Mercer Grand Hotel, brushing the edges of crystal chandeliers. The air shimmered with quiet sophistication, and every surface winked under subdued lighting. At the far end of the lobby, in a tailored charcoal suit, stood Jonathan Mercer, billionaire businessman, steel spine, sharp jawline. He was a man accustomed to being noticed, yet tonight he felt invisible to the only person that mattered. Jonathan checked his watch for the 10th time. An impatient scowl creased the lines deepening around his eyes. At his side, a boy of 10 swayed slightly, a white cane brushing the polished floor. The boy, Ethan, was tall for his age, shy and delicate, with a halo of messy brown curls. His voice was soft when he spoke. "Dad, do you think she'll be nice?" Jonathan didn't respond immediately. He pressed the bridge of his nose, swallowing words that bubbled closer to the surface. "We're here for dinner, Ethan. That's all." But inside, guilt twisted like a knife. Ever since the accident that claimed Ethan's sight, words felt too sharp, too dangerous. The boy didn't complain, didn't cry, yet every quiet tilt of that small chin felt like a reminder that Jonathan had failed to protect him. Through the lobby came Mariana Alvarez, a waitress and dance teacher from the city's Latin Quarter. She was younger, with cinnamon skin and hair pulled into a sleek bun, and an aura that felt like summer. The worn apron she wiped her hands on spoke of long shifts, late nights. Yet when she smiled, it was luminous, and when she spoke, it was soft, hopeful. "Good evening," she said as she knelt slightly, brushing hair from her own tired eyes. "Are you looking for someone?" Ethan turned towards her, voice like a flower to the sun. "My father and I have a reservation." He waved his hand vaguely, brushing the air until it found her hand and shook it. "I'm Ethan. What's your name?" "Mariana," she said, brushing the boy's hand like a whisper. "It's very nice to meet you, Ethan." Jonathan felt an odd flutter deep in his chest. This wasn't what he was used to, people rushing to impress him, to win a glance or a nod. This woman spoke directly to his son, treating him as if he weren't broken or different, and the boy responded like a flower blossoming towards the light. A faint tension tightened Jonathan's jaw. As a man of precision and control, he felt ill-prepared for moments like this, moments when silence spoke louder than words. Mariana smiled down at the boy. "Have you ever tried to dance, Ethan?" Ethan tilted his head shyly. I can't see." Jonathan felt a sting. He started to open his mouth to protest, to draw the boy closer to him, but before he could, Mariana sank to one knee and placed Ethan's hand upon hers. "That doesn't matter, sweetheart. Dancing is about feeling, not seeing. Will you try?" Ethan glanced towards the sound of her voice, smiled shyly, and nodded. Jonathan froze. An ache rose deep in him, an ache buried under years of meetings and money, an ache born from guilt he refused to name. Mariana rose slowly, guiding the boy closer until he stood in the center of the lobby floor. The faint strains of jazz swirled around them like mist. The boy stepped closer, following the sound of her voice, resting one hand upon her palm, and the other upon her waist. Jonathan watched as the boy's chin rose, as a shy smile worked its way across a face that too often held uncertainty. The boy swayed, offbeat and shy, and the waitress smiled as if it didn't matter. As if he didn't have to be perfect. As if trying was enough. Something in Jonathan cracked then. Not with sound, but with silence. Not with force, but with an ache that settled deep in the marrow of a man too long buried in his guilt. He clenched a hand at his side, swallowing the sting in his throat. Have you ever felt like an unexpected moment could shift the course of your life? Have you watched a tiny hand rise in trust and felt your heart surrender? Because that night, as the boy spun slowly in the lobby with a kind, patient waitress, Jonathan Mercer felt the walls he had built between himself and the world begin to shift. He didn't move to stop it. Not then. Not yet. But for the first time in a long while, he wondered if some wounds weren't meant to stay closed. Hello, my beautiful family and friends. I'm so happy to have you here. If you're ready to be part of this special story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and share in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing from you. And be sure to stay tuned, because tomorrow I'll be back with another story that's just as unforgettable, and you won't want to miss it. Alright, let's begin this journey together. Jonathan stood at the edge of the lobby, hands clenched, voice wedged in silence. He watched as Mariana guided Ethan through the slow rise and fall of a jazz waltz. The boy smiled for the first time in weeks, a shy, luminous smile that made Jonathan's heart pound harder than any business win ever had. It had been nearly a year since the accident. The screech of tires, the scream of steel, the sound that changed everything. Since then, Jonathan had tried to fill the silence between him and his son with toys, trips, tutors, and therapists, anything money could buy. But none of it worked. Not like this. Not like a warm hand and a patient voice. Mariana spoke quietly, brushing a strand of hair from the boy's forehead as she stepped closer. That's it, Corazon. Just feel the music. Ethan tilted towards her voice and smiled shyly. I don't have to count. No, mi amor, she said softly. Trust your heart. Let it lead. Trust your heart. Let it lead. The words sank deep into the silence between father and son. To Jonathan, they felt like a reminder of every moment he had failed to be present, every conversation he had pushed aside. In the glare of corporate meetings and skyscrapers, he had learned to count dollars, victories, and losses. But moments like this? Moments that measured worth by trust, belonging, and belonging to one another? Those were moments he had never learned to measure, until now. As the boy spun slowly, leaning into the waitress's sure hands, the lobby quieted. Guests paused mid-conversation. The pianist glanced up and smiled. The boy's shy giggle rang like a bell. And for the first time in years, Jonathan felt tears sting the corners of his own tired, vigilant eyes. He drew closer, slow and tentative. Not the imposing businessman now, nor the titan of industry. Just a father. A father afraid, hopeful, and deeply ashamed. May I? He asked quietly when the music softened. Mariana looked up, surprised, and smiled. Of course, Senor Mercer. She placed the boy's hand in his father's palm. Jonathan sank down to one knee until he was level with his son. Ethan, he said, voice shaking slightly, you don't have to be afraid. Not of falling, not of failing. Not with me here. Will you dance with your old man? Ethan smiled, brushing a hand down the lapel of Jonathan's suit until it found the firmness of a father's hand. I'd like that, Dad. And in that moment, a boy learned to trust again. A father learned to feel. A woman watched, her hand brushing a quiet tear from her brown cheek, knowing somehow she had gifted more than a dance lesson tonight. As they swayed together, father and son, the sound of jazz rising like a prayer, Jonathan felt something long buried crack open within him. Not guilt, not anger, but grace. Grace for the boy he could not fix. Grace for himself. Grace that came from accepting that sometimes, strength is found in vulnerability, in slowing down long enough to connect. Mariana stepped back, brushing her apron, smiling quietly as father and son embraced. To her, it was enough. To witness the soundless miracle of a boy finding his voice, a father finding his heart. But what she didn't know was that this moment would change the trajectory of a man used to controlling every outcome. This moment would teach him that life doesn't hinge upon the size of a bank account or the weight of a deal. It rests upon moments like these, moments of grace, belonging, and trust. In the days and weeks that followed, Jonathan would return to the Mercer Grand Hotel. Not for meetings, not for the cocktail bar, but for moments like this. To watch as a boy learned to navigate the world by sound and sensation, and as a father learned that sometimes strength is measured not in victories, but in moments of surrender. Have you ever felt like the world was reminding you of what matters? Sometimes it doesn't take a grand event, just a quiet moment, a shy smile, or the sound of music guiding a boy's hand. If you felt lost, if you felt as if life has pulled you too far from those you love, remember this. It is never too late to slow down, to step closer, to hold a hand and learn a new step. Whatever dance life is calling you to, now is the moment to answer. Days later, Jonathan Mercer stood at the edge of the Mercer Grand Hotel lobby and watched as the scene before him unfolded like a scene from a cherished film. The boy, his boy Ethan, was laughing. Not just smiling shyly, but laughing openly, leaning into Mariana's voice as she taught him a new dance step. The sound bubbled forth like music itself, filling spaces long muted by silence and pain. Jonathan felt a warmth rise in his chest, one that no business deal, no million-dollar contract had ever offered. The boy he feared he had lost was finding himself right here, one patient moment at a time. That morning, Jonathan had met with the hotel manager to offer Mariana a raise, and an unexpected role. Not just as a waitress, but as a wellness ambassador, someone who could teach staff and guests alike about the simplest form of grace, human connection. She doesn't just carry drinks, he said quietly. She delivers moments. The manager smiled. We've always known that about her. We were just waiting for someone to notice. Jonathan promised to fund a small initiative for staff training in emotional connection, something that might help every employee understand that the heart of any great hotel, or any great endeavor, is its people. But more than that, he promised himself that he would show up. Not just as the owner of a global brand, but as a father, a listener, and a man open to moments that matter. He watched as Mariana spun Ethan across the lobby floor. The boy bumped into a couch and fell, grinning wildly as if falling was the best part. And for the first time, Jonathan didn't rush forward to pick him up. He watched as Mariana offered a hand, as the boy rose and tried again. Slowly, tentatively, but more confident with every step. That was when the lesson sank in, fully and deeply. Life was not about making sure your child never fell. Life was about making sure that when he fell, he felt confident enough to stand again. To try again. To keep going. As the music ended and the lobby erupted into applause, Jonathan crossed the floor. Not as a billionaire, not as an executive in a sharp suit, but as a father with mist in his eyes and pride beating in his heart. He pulled Ethan into a tight hug, brushing the boy's hair as he pressed a kiss to the top of his head. I'm proud of you, son, he said quietly. More proud than I've ever been. Not because you dance. Not because you can walk. But because you have a heart that shines brighter than any spotlight. Never forget that. Ethan smiled, resting his head on his father's chest. I can still learn more, Dad. Will you dance with me tomorrow, too? Jonathan felt the sting of tears rise and smiled. Tomorrow and every day after, my boy. Always. Mariana watched from a distance, brushing a quiet hand down the apron she still wore. In that moment, she felt a warmth in knowing that she had changed more than a boy's life. She had changed a father's heart. That night, long after the lobby lights had dimmed, Jonathan stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Mercer Grand, looking out across a city that had never felt so quiet and hopeful. For years, he had chased worth in tall buildings and crowded meetings. Yet it was in a quiet dance with a shy boy that he discovered the measure of a life well lived. Not in the wins announced by ringing bells, but in the moments exchanged when no one was watching. As he watched the city skyline twinkle, Jonathan promised himself and the boy sleeping down the hall. No matter how high the buildings rise. No matter how far the winds carry them. No matter how fast the world spins. He would always slow down for the moments that matter. Because life is not about getting to the top. It's about knowing who you are holding hands with when the music plays. Will you answer the call? Each of us has moments that can redefine the story we tell ourselves. Moments that matter. They aren't measured in dollars or accolades. They happen in quiet spaces. In a shy smile. In a hand that reaches for hours when we least expect it. Backhand index pointing right if you felt lost or disconnected. If you felt the ache of missing moments like these, don't wait for life to teach you the hard way. Begin now. Begin by reaching out. Begin by showing up. Begin by saying yes to moments that matter. It happened suddenly, almost like fate had decided to throw them together, regardless of their differences. The city skyline winked in the mist as an unexpected downpour rolled across Manhattan. At the cafe, patrons hurried out, and lights winked out one by one. The staff began locking doors. Jonathan didn't intend to stay, and Grace hadn't intended to invite him. Yet when a taxi refused to take him because of the worsening storm, and when an alarm announced the nearby elevators were down, he found himself and Michael standing in the quiet cafe, still holding the warmth of that earlier dance. Looks like we're stuck for a bit, Grace said quietly, brushing raindrops from her apron. The boy stood close to her, brushing the tips of his fingers over the edge of a wooden chair. He smiled faintly, brushing an invisible beat in the air. Jonathan clenched and unclenched his jaw, brushing the rain from the lapels of his tailored coat. Never had he felt more out of place. Never had he felt more aware of it. Thank you for earlier, he offered, voice subdued. I don't know why he responded to you like that. He hasn't responded to much of anything for a long time. Grace smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. He responded because he felt safe. Sometimes that's all a person needs. That word, safe, landed like a quiet shock in Jonathan's chest. When had he ever felt safe? When had he created that for Michael? The boy swayed slightly, brushing a hand along the cafe countertop as if searching for a sound or a touch to guide him. Grace stepped closer. "May I?" she asked quietly. Jonathan froze. It was one thing to watch, another to witness. But the boy responded instantly, reaching out. Grace placed a hand in Michael's and drew him closer, brushing the boy's palm across the cafe's piano. The boy giggled as the sound bubbled out, a sound Jonathan hadn't heard in years. And in that tiny sound, in the soft glow of a single lamp, something unfroze within him. He sank into the velvet chair and watched. Watched as Grace guided Michael's hand across the keys, laughing quietly when a dissonant note rang out. Watched as she sank beside him, brushing her hand lovingly through the boy's soft hair. Watched as Michael smiled and shook with a shy happiness that felt too fragile and too holy for the space between them. A profound stillness settled across the cafe. In that silence, Jonathan felt a shift deep in his chest. Not an explosion, not a thunderclap, but a quiet shift. The kind that happens when a person realizes that their world can be different. Not because of money or status, but because of moments. Because of connections. "Have you ever thought," Grace said quietly, brushing a finger along the piano edge, "that maybe the greatest moments aren't the big victories? Maybe there are moments like this. Quiet. Small. Just present." Jonathan met her gaze and felt the sting of unshed tears. I don't know how to be present anymore," he confessed, brushing the words out like a wounded whisper. Grace tilted her head, brushing the boy's hand one more time. "Then maybe tonight is a chance to start. Not for the world. Not for a deal. Not for the cameras. Just for him." She smiled faintly, brushing the boy's palm to rest upon his father's hand. "Just for you." Jonathan felt Michael's tiny hand land upon his. It felt like the universe had stopped holding its breath. He felt the boy's delicate fingers and for the first time in too long, didn't pull away. "Maybe the biggest victories aren't in buildings," Grace said softly. "Maybe they're in moments like this." Jonathan drew a shaking breath and glanced down at Michael. The boy smiled, a shy, hopeful smile that felt like a whisper in the night. "Maybe you're right," Jonathan said, brushing away the sting in his eyes. "Have you ever had a moment where you felt truly present for someone? A moment when everything else fell away, and it was just about that person? Think about that moment for a second. Would you be willing to share it? Let us know in the comments. Sometimes sharing those moments reminds others how precious they can be." The storm refused to subside, its raindrops beating a slow, hypnotic rhythm against the cafe windows. The three of them sat closer now, Grace on one side of Michael, Jonathan on the other. The boy traced the surface of the piano with delicate fingers, humming faintly, a sound that drew both adults closer to a quiet vulnerability. Jonathan felt the silence stretch and break within him. The cafe felt like a refuge, a space detached from the world he commanded so well from the corner office. Here, stripped of pretense, stripped of status, he felt exposed, and somehow safe. "Grace," he said softly, brushing a hand down the boy's arm as Michael swayed, "you don't know how long it's been since I've seen him like this." His voice caught. "He was just 5 when we lost his mother. After that, it felt like every sound scared him, every hand frightened him. Even mine." Grace met his gaze and didn't flinch. "That kind of loss leaves marks we can't always see," she said quietly, brushing her hand across Michael's tiny knuckles. "But tonight he felt safe. Not because the world changed, but because the space felt safe. And that came from you too." Jonathan shook his head sharply, brushing at the sting of emotion rising to the surface. "I don't deserve that. I buried myself in work because it felt like the only thing I could control." Meanwhile, he was reaching for a father who was too afraid to reach back. Grace didn't try to contradict him. Instead, she brushed the boy's palm across her hand and smiled. "We can't change where we've been, Jonathan. But we can change where we're going." He drew a long, shaking breath, brushing the boy's hand closer until it rested upon his own. "Where we're going," he repeated quietly. And in that moment, a quiet truth settled upon him. What he'd built, what he'd conquered, the buildings, the accolades, meant nothing compared to the warmth of this tiny hand upon his own. With a voice that felt like brushing open a long-sealed door, he spoke. "Grace, can you teach me? Not to dance, but to be present? To slow down? To be a father worth reaching for?" Grace smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "That's a lesson worth learning, Jonathan. And you've already started." At that, Michael laid his head upon his father's chest, brushing the silence with a whisper that felt like a prayer. "Dad." Jonathan pulled the boy closer, brushing the boy's hair and holding him as if making a vow. Not for the world. Not for the company. Not for the name that was built upon a skyline. But for this boy. For the boy who could teach him more about love than any ledger ever could. Grace watched quietly, brushing away the sting of emotion upon her lashes, and smiled as the storm offered its quiet applause upon the windows. Have you ever felt a moment like this, when vulnerability became strength? When saying "I'm scared" or "I don't know how" opened the door to a deeper connection? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let others know that it's okay to slow down, to open up, and to choose moments that matter more than milestones. The room felt different tonight. Not just because of the soft glow of the lamp or the faint hum of traffic beyond the tall windows, but because of the silence. A silence that felt like a blanket wrapped around three people who had somehow found themselves in each other's orbit. Jonathan sat beside the piano, brushing the edge of the keys with his fingertips as if checking that it hadn't disappeared. The boy's cloudy eyes shimmered, and Michael watched him from the doorway. Grace stood nearby, brushing down the edges of her apron, brushing away moments of tension from earlier. The air felt tentative, fragile, as if one word too sharp could shatter the spell. "Play something," Grace encouraged softly, brushing a hand across Jonathan's shoulder. "Something slow, something you like." Jonathan smiled shyly. His fingers pressed down tentatively, yielding a quiet, halting melody. The sound was simple, slow, a wisp of a tune that rose and fell like breathing. Michael felt it sink into him. He sank into a leather chair, resting an elbow on its arm. It felt like belonging. Not belonging in the way he was accustomed to, in rooms lined with trophies, sharp-edged meetings, or signed contracts, but belonging in its simplest form. Just belonging in silence. Grace watched the boy, leaning down closer until she could rest her hand lightly on the back of his. "That's beautiful, Jonathan," she said quietly. Jonathan smiled. "My mom used to hum this when she baked," he said. His voice was shy, and Michael felt the sting of guilt rise sharply in the room. He hadn't baked with his boy. He hadn't brought him the comfort he should have. Not until now. The boy tilted his head towards the sound of Grace's voice. "Why are you so kind?" he asked suddenly. "Most people don't notice a kid like me." Grace drew in a breath and sank beside him. "I notice because I was a kid like you in some ways," she confessed. "Not blind, no, but invisible. To so many people. Helping others see their worth reminds me of mine." A beat passed. The boy pressed another key, one that rang like a hopeful whisper. Michael felt a lump rising in his throat. Grace glanced towards Michael, brushing hair from her forehead. "Your father came tonight," she said quietly. "That must mean something to you." Jonathan tilted towards the sound. "I felt it when he walked in. Even before he spoke." "Felt it?" Grace asked. Jonathan smiled shyly. "He has a sound when he walks, like long strides trying to make a space for themselves." He gave a soft laugh. "That's how I knew it was him." Michael felt the sting deepen until it bubbled from deep within. He rose, slowly crossed the room, and sank beside them. Without words, he placed a hand on Jonathan's shoulder. The boy's breath hitched, and for a moment, father and son were united not by words, but by the quiet sound of breathing and belonging. "I should have been there for you every moment," Michael spoke quietly, voice shaking. "And I failed, because I was too blinded by my pain to notice yours. But tonight, I can try to be different. Will you give me that chance?" Jonathan didn't answer immediately. The silence felt like an eternity. Grace watched from the side, her fingers brushing the boy's hand, anchoring him. Then slowly, a hand rose from the piano and settled atop Michael's. "I'll try too, Dad," came the soft reply. A warmth bubbled between the three of them, filling the space until it felt like a quiet, holy thing. The boy pressed one more note, a long, hopeful one that shimmered in the room like a prayer. Grace smiled quietly, brushing a hand down Jonathan's shirt, and rising to give father and son their space. In that moment, no words were needed. The boy pressed down another soft, hopeful chord. The billionaire father and the blind boy, separated for too long, began to find the faint threads that would stitch their worlds back together. And in the silence between the notes, in the warmth of hands resting upon hands, and in the beating of 3 hopeful hearts, a tiny seed of belonging was planted. Jonathan stood halfway across the floor, chest rising and falling, knuckles brushing the edge of a table. Just moments ago, it felt like the world was falling into place, that he was no longer a boy lost in the dark. Mariana had been there, guiding him, anchoring him. But now everything felt as if it were splintering apart. Andrew watched from the hallway, fists clenched. The evidence was in the envelope he had been handed by one of his security staff. A hastily snapped photo, a hastily scrawled note. She came for the boy, hoping for the father's trust. To him, it felt like betrayal. His heart pounded as he stepped into the room. Mariana. The word was sharp, commanding. She turned, brushing hair from her brow. What is it? He waved the paper like a weapon. Care to explain this? The silence that followed was long and burning. The image was of Maya talking to one of his staff the night she came to the house. The words trust and money were scrawled across it. To him, it was enough. Her voice shook. That night, he was trying to warn me. I didn't want to alarm you. She stepped closer. Andrew, I came here for Jonathan. To help him dance. Not for this. The sting in her voice was palpable. But Andrew shook his head sharply. How can I believe that? The deep crack in his voice was the sound of a man reliving old wounds. Memories of betrayal, of those who came only for the weight of his wallet, bubbled forth. I trusted you. I let you into our lives, Mariana. Do you have any idea how rare that is for me? Jonathan stood still, listening. The sound of heartbreak was a quiet one, a breath caught, a finger brushing the edge of a table, a boy trying to comprehend why the warmth he felt moments ago was being pulled from under him. Please, Maya stepped closer, voice shaking now. I have never wanted a thing from you except to help that boy. To help him feel like he belonged. She glanced toward Jonathan, and for a moment, the boy pressed a hand to his chest, swallowing hard. The room was charged, words crackling in the air like lightning. Andrew shook his head, voice rising despite himself. I can't risk this again. Not with him. He glanced at Jonathan, guilt burning across his features. Not with my son. His voice cracked. You need to leave, Maya. Whatever this was, it ends tonight. Jonathan spoke for the first time, voice wavering like a thin rope across a chasm. But, Dad. No. Maya didn't hurt us. She wouldn't. He felt for Maya's hand, brushing her fingers like a beacon. I don't want her to go. But Andrew turned away, unable to bear the sting of the boy's plea. I can't. Not again. The door clicked shut as Maya stepped out, leaving only silence and heartbreak behind. For hours after, Maya stood by the gate of the property, brushing the dried petals of a forgotten flower between her fingers. Inside, a boy pressed a hand to the window, and a father sank into a chair, staring at the photo that had broken their world. It was in that silence, the silence that felt like a tomb, that each of their hearts started to wonder. What if we were wrong? What if the thing we feared wasn't betrayal, but belonging? The night felt longer than any in recent memory. Andrew sat in the silence of his study, fingers brushing the surface of an old photo, one of him and Jonathan long ago before the accident, when laughter came easily. The boy in the picture was carefree, unguarded, hopeful. Not like the boy he just watched crumple tonight when Mariana was forced out of their lives. Have I made a mistake? He wondered aloud, voice breaking under the weight of guilt. Meanwhile, across town, Maya was hunched on the edge of her bed. The sting of rejection felt like a fresh burn. All she had wanted was to help that boy rediscover a piece of himself, to dance, to lead, to smile. Yet one misunderstanding, one snapshot out of context, had stripped it all away. Her phone buzzed, lighting up the room. An old voice memo from Jonathan, saved long ago, crackled forth. Thank you, Miss Mariana, for making me feel like I can lead again, even when I can't see. Fresh tears brimmed in Maya's eyes. Sometimes the heart knows its worth long before the world is ready to accept it. Back in the mansion, a soft knock came at the door. It was Jonathan. The boy stood with one hand pressed to the doorframe, voice shaking. "Dad. I miss her." Andrew sank deeper into his chair, torn apart by guilt and stubborn pride. "I don't know if she'll come back, son. Not after tonight." Jonathan stepped closer, voice rising with quiet conviction. "Then we go to her. We tell her that we're sorry. That she gave us more than we can ever repay." He took a deep breath. "That we're better because she came into our lives." A long silence passed, punctured only by the sound of the clock marking moments lost and moments yet to be found. In that silence, Andrew felt the weight of his choice pressing down upon him. Not just as a father but as a man, one who had learned the hard way that trust, like a flame, can be extinguished quickly if you aren't willing to shield it from the wind. He rose from the chair, crossed to his son, and sank to one knee. The boy felt the warmth of strong hands resting on his shoulders. "Then we go. We tell her we're sorry. We ask for a chance to make this right." Jonathan smiled then, and for the first time in a long while, Andrew felt a piece of the world tilt back into balance. Sometimes saying sorry is the bravest thing we can do. Sometimes choosing trust, choosing love, is the only path forward. If this moment spoke to your heart, if you've ever felt torn between fear and belonging, I invite you to share your story in the comments. Let Mariana and Andrew's choice help illuminate the path for someone else tonight. The morning sun spilled across the city like a hopeful whisper, brushing the edges of buildings, gilding the threads of a new day. Maya stood by the old dance studio, brushing a hand across the chipped wooden door. Memories bubbled forth, moments of shared silence with Jonathan, moments of shy warmth. The sting of rejection was still fresh, but deep down, some part of her refused to accept that this was the end. Then came the sound of soft taps upon the concrete. She turned slowly, and her breath caught in her chest. There was Jonathan, hand resting upon the crook of his father's arm, making slow but confident steps toward her. Andrew walked beside him, his voice wavering slightly as he spoke. "Miss Mariana, I owe you an apology. Not just for misunderstanding you, but for failing to recognize how much you've given to my son. You didn't just teach him to dance. You gave him a reason to stand tall again." Jonathan smiled shyly and stepped closer. "Will you dance with me? Just one more time." A lump rose in Mariana's throat, and the sting of tears pressed hard at the corners of her eyes. The boy's hand shook as he offered it to her, and she placed her palm upon it as if accepting a sacred trust. "Of course, Jonathan. I'd be honored." In that moment, a sound floated from a nearby cafe, soft jazz, slow. Maya guided the boy into a simple step, one hand resting upon the crook of his elbow, her voice soft and sure. "Trust the music, Jonathan. Trust that it will carry you, like it always has." Andrew watched from a distance, swallowing down the sting of guilt that bubbled in his chest. Yet within that sting was also a warmth, a glimmer of belonging that he had long buried. This boy, this dancer, and this quiet, strong woman had reshaped the boundaries of his heart. After the dance came to a close, Maya stepped back, brushing away a stray strand of hair from the boy's forehead. Jonathan smiled. "Thank you, Miss Mariana. You gave me my life back." His voice quavered, and she pulled him into a tight hug. Then she felt a hand upon her shoulder, warm, strong, shaking slightly. Andrew stood before her, voice wavering. "Mariana, I don't deserve the chance to ask this of you, but can we try to build something new? Not just for Jonathan, but for ourselves." He glanced down, swallowing hard, and offered a faint smile. "Trust is hard to win. I want to try to be a man worth earning from you." Mariana searched the depths of those tired, hopeful eyes and felt the tension dissolve. The world was quiet for a moment. Not in silence, but in possibility. Not in heartbreak, but in belonging. She smiled softly. "Trust is like music, Andrew. It doesn't just happen. We practice. We stumble. We try again. And we find the rhythm, together." Jonathan tightened his grip upon both their hands, grinning as if the universe had just reshuffled itself into a more hopeful design. Then came the sound of soft jazz from the cafe across the street, filling the air like a sign. Mariana pressed her hand to Andrew's palm, felt the strength and vulnerability in that quiet connection, and nodded. "Let's try," she said simply. And in that moment, Under the gold-tinged morning light, upon a quiet street where broken threads found a way to weave themselves whole, three people stepped together into a new chapter. Not defined by loss or betrayal, but by the quiet miracle of belonging. Sometimes belonging doesn't happen in grand gestures, but in moments of trust and quiet surrender. Have you ever found belonging when you least expected it? What moment reshaped your heart? Share your story in the comments, and let's build a space where belonging shines for all of us. Thank you so much for watching to the end. I'm sure you enjoyed it, didn't you? We have plenty more beautiful and interesting stories waiting for you. So go ahead, click the image on your screen and enjoy the next one. Like and subscribe for more heartwarming stories like this.